Welcome to Conversations for a Better You. Subscribe, like, and hit the bell to stay inspired and keep growing with us.
Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into a self-help book called Prioritizing Self, A Journey to Emotional Healing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's all about, well, as the title suggests, putting ourselves first to kind of kickstart that whole emotional healing process. And they actually weave in some fascinating ideas from Carl Jung.
Okay.
I think a lot of our listeners are probably looking for tips on self-care or how to deal with, like really tough emotions. And this book really dives into that, but with this interesting twist that it all starts with prioritizing ourselves.
Right. And that doesn't mean being selfish.
No, exactly. It's not about just, like only caring about yourself.
Right.
It's more about understanding that taking care of your own well-being is actually the foundation for everything else.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
That's a good one. And speaking of good quotes, there's this great one from the book. It says, "The answer to these questions is not found in the opinions of others or in external approval, but in a deep connection with our own being." Powerful.
Right. It's like this reminder that true well-being, true happiness, it comes from within, not from constantly seeking validation from everyone else.
Yeah, that's so true. It's easy to fall into that trap of looking for approval outside ourselves.
Have you ever noticed yourself doing that? Like really seeking validation from others?
Oh, definitely. I think we all do to some extent, right? It's almost like it's ingrained in us to care about what other people think.
Totally.
Yeah.
And, this book connects that to this idea of the shadow self, a term from Jungian psychology.
Okay, the shadow self. That sounds kind of mysterious and maybe a little intimidating.
It does, right.
Okay.
Can you break that down for us? What exactly is this shadow?
All right, so think of it like this. Everyone has parts of themselves, right, that they don't necessarily want to acknowledge or even admit exist.
Oh, for sure.
Right. Like maybe you have a fear of public speaking, but you tell yourself and everyone else you're just an introvert.
Right.
Or maybe you snap at someone you love and then justify it by saying you were just stressed. Oh, I've totally been there.
We all have,
Yeah.
right? So these are kind of everyday examples of how our shadow can kind of operate. It's those aspects of ourselves that we deem unacceptable or we're afraid of. So we kind of shove them down into our unconscious.
Like those little things we try to hide, even from ourselves. Like that time I pretended I wasn't totally bothered when someone else got the promotion I really wanted.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
And prioritizing self suggests that when we don't face these shadow aspects, they can actually start to run the show in not so great ways.
Okay, so it's not just that we have these hidden parts, but they can actually influence our actions and even the situations we end up in.
Exactly. It's like they're pulling the strings from behind the scenes.
Wow, okay, that's a little unsettling. So how does that actually play out in real life? What are some examples of how these shadow aspects can manifest?
Well, imagine you keep finding yourself in relationships where you feel undervalued. Maybe that's your shadow self, perhaps with a deep-seated belief that you're not worthy of love, attracting those very situations.
Right. Or maybe you're constantly overworking yourself, pushing past your limits, never saying no.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
That could be a shadow-driven pattern stemming from, let's say, a fear of failure or a need to prove yourself.
So we're basically attracting experiences that mirror those hidden beliefs.
Exactly. And prioritizing self ties this into another big idea from Jung, the idea of individuation.
Individuation. All right, break that down for us. What does that even mean?
It's essentially about breaking free from those shadow patterns and all those external influences that are kind of holding us back and preventing us from discovering our true authentic selves.
Okay, so it's like we're shedding those layers of conditioning and expectations to uncover who we really are.
Exactly. It's about this incredible journey where you stop needing everyone else to tell you you're okay. You stop chasing external validation and start tuning into what truly makes you happy, what brings you fulfillment, regardless of what anyone else thinks. That sounds so liberating. So it's about recognizing that we have the power to validate ourselves. We don't need those emotional crumbs from others to feel good about ourselves.
Exactly. And the book argues that this is where a huge shift happens. You stop accepting less than you deserve because you finally see your own inherent worth. You're no longer seeking external validation to fill those voids that only you can really heal.
That's powerful. It's like we're taking back our power, right?
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that you are whole and complete just as you are.
I love that. But, the book also talks about how this kind of inner work can have a real impact on our relationships.
It can.
And that's where it gets a little maybe tricky for some people, right?
Yes.
Because prioritizing ourselves can sometimes lead to, well, losing people in our lives.
It can.
And that's a scary thought for a lot of us. What if we're not ready for that kind of change?
No, it's true. As we grow and evolve, not everyone in our lives is going to be able to keep up. It's like you're changing the radio station, and some people are really loving that old song. They might not want to listen to your new tune.
That's a great analogy.
Right. And that's okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anyone's wrong. It's just people are at different places in their journeys.
So it's not necessarily a bad thing if some relationships fall away as we're growing.
Exactly. In fact, the book actually calls it a form of liberation.
Liberation.
Yeah. By letting go of those relationships that no longer resonate, you're actually making space for new ones that align more with who you've become.
Okay, liberation definitely sounds better than losing people.
Right.
But, Jung also talked about this idea of the unconscious mind resisting change, right? Like it kind of wants to keep things the way they are. How does that play into all of this?
Well, think about it this way. Our unconscious mind loves what's familiar. Even if it's not the healthiest thing for us, even if it's keeping us stuck, it wants to hold on to those old patterns and habits.
It's like that feeling when you finally decide to ditch that unhealthy snack you love, and suddenly all you can think about is that snack, right?
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Even though logically it's not good for you, that unconscious part of you is like, give me the chips.
Exactly. So those moments of self-doubt, that urge to go back to old habits, even when we know they're not serving us, could that be our unconscious mind trying to keep things the same?
Exactly. It's like that inner resistance to change. But prioritizing self really emphasizes that facing our shadow, however uncomfortable it might be, is crucial for true healing.
All right, so we know we need to face this shadow self, but how do we even begin to do that? I mean, that can feel really intimidating, right?
Yeah, it can. But the book suggests we start by paying attention to our strong emotional reaction.
Our emotional reactions, okay.
So let's say you're scrolling through social media, right?
Yeah.
And someone's post triggers a wave of envy or resentment.
Oh, yeah, been there.
We all have. Instead of just brushing it off, prioritizing self says, ask yourself, what is it about this post that's triggering me?
That's interesting. It's like being a detective for your own emotions, right?
Exactly. And that's where we start to uncover those shadow parts.
Okay, so we're paying attention to those strong emotions. We're kind of digging a little deeper. But how does that actually help us face those shadow parts?
Well, Jung also talked about this principle of projection. It suggests that we often see in others those very things we don't want to admit about ourselves.
Oh, interesting. So if I'm totally annoyed by someone's bragging, for example, maybe it's because there's a part of me that also craves that recognition, but I'm pushing it down.
Precisely. It's like those moments of judgment or irritation towards others can actually be clues to what we've buried within our own shadow.
It's almost like our shadow is trying to communicate with us through those reactions.
Exactly. And prioritizing self encourages us to see these moments not as annoyances, but as these amazing opportunities for self-discovery.
Okay, so we're starting to see those shadow parts, but what do we do once we see them? Do we just try to ignore them or push them away again?
Well, that's the thing. The book really emphasizes that avoiding our shadow actually just prolongs the pain. It's like trying to outrun your own shadow. You can't really escape it.
I see that. So we have to go through it to get to the other side.
Exactly. Prioritizing self has this really powerful line. It says, the pain of facing reality is temporary. The pain of living in denial lasts a lifetime.
Wow, that's intense, but so true. It's like we have to rip off the Band-Aid to let the wound heal properly.
Exactly. But I think for a lot of us, the idea of actually confronting those deep-seated fears or insecurities, it can feel really overwhelming.
For sure.
Prioritizing self acknowledges that it's not about beating ourselves up for having these parts of ourselves, right? It's about gently bringing them into the light with a lot of compassion and patience.
Okay, that makes it feel a little less scary. So it's like extending that same kindness and understanding to ourselves, even to those parts we might initially judge or reject.
Exactly. It's about cultivating that sense of self-acceptance for all parts of ourselves.
Okay, so we're seeing our shadow, approaching it with kindness, but then what? How do we actually start to change those patterns that might be causing us trouble?
Well, prioritizing self has this really empowering message, which is that you have the power to rewrite your story.
Rewrite our story, okay.
You can choose new beliefs and new ways of relating to yourself and the world.
So we're not stuck with those old patterns or limiting beliefs forever. We can actually choose to change.
Exactly. And prioritizing self encourages us to ask ourselves, what stories from our past might be holding us back? What beliefs are we clinging to that are no longer serving us?
I like that. So it's not about erasing the past, but about looking at it with fresh eyes and seeing how it might be impacting our present.
Exactly. And once you identify those old stories and beliefs, you can start to reframe them.
Okay, so we're becoming conscious of those narratives, but how do we actually change them?
Wow.
What are some tangible steps we can take?
Well, one of the first things the book suggests is to pay attention to those automatic negative thoughts that pop up throughout the day. Are we constantly telling ourselves, I'm not good enough, or I'll never succeed, or I'm going to mess this up?
Oh, those are the worst.
They are. But we have the power to choose which thoughts we focus on. It's like weeding a garden. We need to pull out those negative thought weeds and plant more positive, supportive ones in their place.
Okay, so instead of saying, I'm going to mess this up, maybe we could try something like, I'm capable of handling this, right?
Yes, about consciously shifting that inner dialogue.
Okay, I can see how this all comes together now. We prioritize ourselves by facing our shadows, rewriting those old stories, and choosing more empowering thoughts. But what happens when we inevitably hit those roadblocks or setbacks? Those moments where we feel like we're slipping back into those old patterns. How do we stay motivated and keep moving forward?
Well, prioritizing self emphasizes that setbacks are a normal part of any growth process. It's not about being perfect. It's about being persistent.
So it's not about never falling down, but about getting back up when we do.
Exactly. It's about having that resilience. And the book actually says that those setbacks can be really valuable learning opportunities.
Oh, interesting. So it's about reframing challenges as opportunities for growth rather than as failures.
Exactly. And prioritizing self encourages us to approach those challenges with a whole lot of self-compassion.
This idea of self-compassion seems to be a big theme here. What does that actually mean in practice?
Imagine you have a friend who is going through a tough time, right?
Okay.
How would you talk to them? Would you criticize them? Tell them they're not good enough? Or would you be kind and understanding and offer them support?
Of course, I'd be supportive.
Right. And that's what self-compassion is about. Treating ourselves with that same level of kindness and understanding.
So we're being our own best friend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And recognizing that we are all a work in progress. We're allowed to make mistakes. We don't have to be perfect.
I love that. It takes so much pressure off. Okay, so we're prioritizing ourselves, we're facing our shadows, we're rewriting those old stories, and we're approaching everything with self-compassion. But what does living authentically actually look like? Like, how do we know if we're on the right track?
Well, prioritizing self suggests that living authentically is all about aligning our actions with our values.
Oh, okay.
So it's not just about what we say we believe in. It's about actually making choices that reflect those beliefs.
So it's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. And the book really encourages us to make choices that feel genuinely true to who we are, even if those choices are unpopular or difficult.
That can be scary though, right? Especially if we're used to trying to please everyone or constantly seeking approval.
It definitely takes courage. But the book reminds us that authenticity is not about being perfect or trying to make everyone happy. It's about embracing those parts of ourselves that make us unique, even the messy parts, and expressing that true self in the world.
So it's about owning who we are, flaws and all.
Exactly. And what's interesting is the book suggests that when we live authentically, we naturally start to attract people and experiences that resonate with that energy.
Oh, I like that. It's like we're sending out a signal that says, this is me, and the universe responds by bringing us people and experiences that align with that.
Exactly. It's about creating this positive feedback loop. And prioritizing self really emphasizes that when we prioritize ourselves and live authentically, we create this ripple effect that extends outward into our relationships, our work, our communities.
Wow, that's so cool. It's inspiring to think that our own journey of self-discovery and healing can actually have a positive impact on the world around us.
It can. It all starts with that first step of prioritizing ourselves and embracing who we truly are.
Well, I'm feeling pretty inspired. It's like this whole new way of looking at things,
It's a powerful journey, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And remember, it's not about making huge changes overnight. Prioritizing self is all about taking those small steps, celebrating the progress we make, and approaching the whole process with a lot of kindness and compassion.
Small steps, self-compassion, and a whole lot of self-discovery.
That's the recipe.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, we'll be back in a bit to continue our deep dive into prioritizing self. As we're talking about all of this, it strikes me that making these changes, prioritizing ourselves, it doesn't have to mean a complete life overhaul overnight, does it?
Oh, absolutely not. Prioritizing self actually emphasizes that it's the small, consistent choices that we make each day that really add up.
Okay, that's a relief to hear because it can feel really overwhelming otherwise. Like, I don't have to become a totally different person by tomorrow morning.
Exactly. It's those little shifts you make day by day that lead to those big transformations down the line.
So if we're talking small steps, what are some practical things that we can start incorporating into our lives?
Well, the book talks a lot about setting healthy boundaries,
Okay.
which is really like a cornerstone of self-care.
Yeah, boundaries. I feel like that's something that so many people struggle with.
It is. It's so common.
It's like we're so worried about pleasing other people or, not rocking the boat that we end up overcommitting ourselves and then feeling resentful.
Exactly. And especially if you were raised with this belief that saying no is selfish or rude,
Right.
it can be really hard to set those boundaries.
Yeah.
But the book challenges that idea and says that setting boundaries is actually a form of self-respect.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It's about recognizing that your time and energy are valuable and choosing to spend them in ways that feel good to you.
I love that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, have you had any personal experiences where setting a boundary led to a positive outcome? Something that maybe you could share that might encourage our listeners?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I used to be like the queen of people-pleasing. I said yes
Yeah.
to everything. Every request, every invitation, even when I was already feeling completely stretched thin,
Yeah.
and it was all because I was afraid of disappointing people or, seeming unhelpful.
I feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But eventually it led to burnout.
Yeah.
I was giving so much of myself away that I had nothing left.
Right. You're constantly running on empty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I started to feel resentful. So I finally decided to start setting some boundaries.
Okay. And how did that go?
It was scary at first, but I started with small things. Like I started saying no to social events that I didn't genuinely want to go to.
Okay.
And instead of coming up with elaborate excuses, I just said, thank you so much for the invitation, but I won't be able to make it.
Just like that.
Yeah.
No guilt trips.
No guilt trips. It was so freeing. And you know what? The people who really cared about me, they respected my boundaries.
Okay.
And the relationships that were based on, obligation or this need to please, they kind of naturally started to fade away,
Yeah. It's interesting.
which was sad at first. But what happened is I started to attract new people into my life who appreciated my authenticity and respected my need for space.
So setting boundaries didn't just protect your energy, it actually helped you cultivate more genuine connections.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what prioritizing self really emphasizes. When you start honoring your own needs, you actually create space for those healthier, more balanced relationships.
I love that. That's a really great example, and I think it's so important for people to hear those real-life stories about how these concepts actually play out. It makes it feel much more attainable.
Right.
But the book does acknowledge that setting boundaries can be particularly challenging for people who have